Hi everybody, it's Barbara. Today I'm going to show you how to make 8 different backgrounds using one stencil. We're going to start with dry embossing, and for this entire video we're going to be using the Harlequin Stencil. As you see here, I have 2 copies of it. I have one that I keep clean. I only use it for dry embossing on paper or for embossing with embossing paste. The other one I use for all of the ink techniques. Sometimes they will get a little staining, and I don't want to transfer that to clean cardstock. So we're going to start with the dry embossing, and first of all we're going to need a die cutting machine of some kind. I have a Vagabond, and the sandwich is as follows. The main platform, the wafer thin die cutting sheet, a cutting pad, and then the next thing we're going to have is the Die-namics embossing pad combo from My Favorite Things. We will use the thin one for this technique. There's a thick one and a thin one, and this one will use the thin for stencil embossing. So you have your pad, your paper, your stencil, and then the top cutting pad, and then you just run it through your machine just like you would if you were going to cut with a die. And there you have a gorgeously embossed piece of paper. The dimension is just remarkable, very crisp. Next up we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to add some ink. We start with just regular cardstock. I'm using Sweet Tooth cardstock for almost everything here. We need a brayer, and I'm using the hybrid ink in Sour Apple. I have found that the hybrid ink pad is very firm and works better for this because you're going to be putting some pressure on that brayer to ink it up. The premium dye ink has a soft foam pad, and I think you would squeeze too much ink out of it if you tried this. So since the hybrid pad is really nice and firm with a linen cover, it really works well if you're going to have to add pressure. So you ink up your brayer, and then you ink up your stencil over and over until it is covered. You don't have to cover the whole thing, I don't guess, but it's just what I do. So make sure it's as even as possible. I actually tried one time just dabbing the sponge on it rather than using the brayer, but you get a much smoother coverage with the brayer. Now you bring in the Vagabond back out again, and the same sandwich as for the dry embossing because the technique is the same. You're just adding some ink onto the stencil. Now since the stencil is larger than that embossing mat, and I don't want to get any ink on my mat, I cut a piece of inexpensive cardstock to cover it. So it's just a half sheet. So that's on top of my mat, then my cardstock again, and now I'm going to put the inked up stencil down, ink down, of course, and then run it through, put the top cutting plate on, and then run it through. Try to be real careful that you don't move that because it will smear your ink where you don't want it. And then just run it through just like you normally would, and when it comes out, you've got a beautifully embossed piece of paper with ink in the lower parts, if you can picture that. You still got the embossing, and that's hard to see in this picture, but then you've got the addition of ink. Okay, next up we're going to use embossing paste with our stencil. For this one I'm using white embossing paste, the clean stencil, the one with no ink stains, a palette knife, and a piece of Sweet Tooth cardstock. I'm going to tape it down because I don't want it to move while I'm spreading the paste with my palette knife. So next step is to take some paste out on your knife. You really don't need a lot. A little of this goes a long way, so better start with a little bit, and you can always add rather than having to scrape a bunch off. So you just smear it wherever you want it. You can certainly cover the whole thing. I tend to kind of leave some edges that are not to give it a little bit of a distressed look, but it's certainly all a matter of taste. It's important with this stuff to immediately go wash your stencil and your palette knife. And I will do that and be right back. But I want you to see all the dimension that you get with this embossing paste. I really love it. Okay, so next up we're going to watercolor through our stencil. And for this I'm going to use watercolor paper. I'm going to use premium dye ink, a water brush, the ink stencil, and the watercolor paper. This is Ranger watercolor paper, and as you can see, one side is rougher than the other, and for this I find that the smoother side works better. For some reason, for me, the rougher side tends to suck ink under the edges of the stencil openings, so your design blurs a little too much. So the smooth side doesn't seem to do that as badly, so I prefer the smooth side. While you're doing this, remember you do not need much water, so don't squeeze your water brush at all. In fact, wipe off any excess water before you start, because if you do get it too wet and too liquidy, it will seep up under your stencil edges and again blur your design. So make sure that you keep your brush as dry as possible. The water will come out as needed through osmosis through the barrel of the water brush, so you don't need to squeeze it for this like you would with a watercolor wash. With that you do need to add lots of water, but for this you're just basically just painting. So keep the water at a minimum to keep your design as clear as possible. You're still going to get a little bit, which is part of the beauty of this technique to me, but you don't want so much that you can't see your design. So I'm just going to do 3 rows here, and I'll finish this later, but just doing 3 rows so that you can see how I'm doing it. And always clean your brush right away. And to do that, all you have to do is squeeze out some water. And now you'll see the Harlequin design. And now we're going to go on to do some sponging. And for this technique, you're going to see 3 of the 8 different ways. We're going to start with one color, add another color, and then another little technique that I like to do. So I'm using my sponge daubers, just Sweet Tooth cardstock, and premium dye ink. I'm going to tape down my cardstock so it doesn't move, and tape down my stencil on top. Then I'm going to start with orange Zest and find my dauber that I already have set up with that ink on it. And then I'm just going to sponge in and fill in every one of the Harlequin designs. And I'm speeding this up so you won't get too bored with this. Just fill it in all of the openings with the ink, and it's not too important to keep it perfectly even unless that's what you want. I prefer actually a little variation in the intensity of the color. I think it adds to the look. So that's the first color done, and this is certainly a perfectly fine background. You could just stay with this, but now I'm going to add another color, and pardon my head there, but I have to be able to see so I can line it up properly. But you're going to, and I cleaned my stencil in between, by the way, so that my colors don't muddy each other. I'm going to zoom this in so you can see how I am covering the previously sponged areas with the stencil, so that now we have more open uncolored area. And now I'm using cotton candy dye ink for this. And when it's finished, you will see that around each of the diamond-shaped inked areas there is a white margin. So I'm speeding this up a little bit too so that you won't have to watch every little bit of it. This is just kind of busy work. So just fill in all of these, all the areas with the second ink. And then that part's done. And you can see that this is just a two-color background. And again, it's perfectly fine if you just want to leave it like that. And sometimes I do. Sometimes, though, I want to add a third color. And to do that, I use a fine line marker. Sometimes I want it really, really straight and perfectly lined up, so I use a ruler to do it. But a lot of times I just want to freehand it. I think it just gives it a very artsy look and just adds a little something to it because it's not perfectly straight. I'm not sure if you can see it very well or not. But this is a dark blue that I'm adding in here. And then after you finish going all in one direction, you turn it and go in the other direction. And with this also, I'll finish this later, but I just wanted you to see how I go about it. I think you can see that a little bit better. Okay, so the next technique that we're going to do is spraying and splattering. I'm going to be spraying through the stencil. I have a spray box here that to keep all the spray off of everything else. I just put my Sweet Tooth cardstock in there and my stencil on top, and I'm just putting one little bit of tape just to keep it from going anywhere. And I'm going to prop up the front so you can get a better view. I'm using my mini mister that has Kraft dye ink in it, along with some Mixables sheer shimmer mist and water, and I'm just going to spray. And don't be afraid to spray it, but keep your mister moving all the time, or you'll get too much in one place and it will run. So just spray while you're on the move. And I kind of like to do it heavier in some areas and lighter in others, just for some variation. And as you can see, it's a nice little look. Now also, you can leave it like this, of course, but I'm going to use some Mixables Steel Shimmer Mist now and just do some splattering. And for that, I'm just going to take the plunger out of the bottle and just tap, tap, tap until I get enough splatter on the cardstock. And then that's done. Just set it aside to dry. And that's it. I've shown you 8 different ways you can use a stencil to create a background. Thanks for watching.